She was sold for $30 and sent away to serve a cruel stranger. But when a silent cowboy quietly stepped in, everything began to change. Who was he really, and why did he care? What happens next will surprise you. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. Sarah Miller stared out the dusty window of her aunt's small wooden house on the outskirts of Redemption Creek, Montana. The year was 1885, and at 17, Sarah's life had taken a tragic turn. Her parents had died from typhoid fever just 3 months ago, leaving her in the care of her Aunt Martha, a bitter woman who saw Sarah as nothing more than a burden. "Girl, come down here right now." Martha's sharp voice cut through Sarah's thoughts. Sarah tucked a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear and hurried downstairs. "Yes, Aunt Martha?" Martha stood in the kitchen, her thin lips pressed into a tight line. "I've made arrangements for you. Mr. Reynolds from the Lazy R Ranch needs a housekeeper. You'll be leaving tomorrow morning." Sarah's heart sank. "But Aunt..." "Martha, I thought I could stay and help you here." "Help? You're another mouth to feed, and times are hard." Martha's eyes narrowed. "I've already accepted payment for your services. $30. It's settled." Sarah felt as if she'd been slapped. "You sold me? Don't be dramatic. I arranged employment. You should be grateful. Many girls your age have no prospects at all." Martha turned away. "Pack your things, Mr. Reynolds will collect you at dawn." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her small bundle of possessions lay ready by the door: 2 dresses, a hairbrush that had belonged to her mother, and a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. As she watched the stars through her window, tears streamed down her face. Her parents had dreamed of sending her to a teaching college back east. Now, she was being handed off like livestock. Morning came too quickly. A wagon pulled up outside, and Sarah met her fate with quiet dignity. Mr. Reynolds was a squat, red-faced man who barely acknowledged her as she climbed aboard. "The ranch is 15 miles west," he said gruffly. "You'll be cooking, cleaning, and tending to the house. My wife passed last winter, and the place has gone to hell." Sarah nodded silently, watching her aunt's house disappear behind them. The Montana landscape rolled out before her, vast, beautiful, and indifferent to her troubles. After several hours, they arrived at the Lazy R Ranch. It was larger than Sarah had expected, with a main house, a barn, and several outbuildings. As they pulled up, Sarah noticed a tall figure by the corral. "That's Jake Harmon," Mr. Reynolds said, following her gaze. "Foreman of the ranch. Man barely speaks 3 words a day, but he's the best horseman and ranch hand in the territory. Stay out of his way." Jake Harmon stood watching them, his face partially shadowed by his hat. He made no move to help as Mr. Reynolds roughly helped Sarah down from the wagon. "This is the girl I told you about," Reynolds called to him. "Show her to the house while I stable the horses." Jake approached slowly. Sarah estimated him to be in his late 20s, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that had seen its share of sun and hardship. His eyes were a startling blue against his tan skin. "Miss," he said simply, tipping his hat. His voice was deep and quiet, like distant thunder. "I'm Sarah Miller," she offered. He nodded and gestured for her to follow him to the house. As they walked, Sarah noticed a slight limp in his gait. The ranch house was spacious, but neglected. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled stale. "Your room," Jake said, pointing to a small chamber off the kitchen. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small dresser. Supper at 6. With that, he was gone, leaving Sarah alone in what would be her new home. She sat on the bed and finally allowed herself a moment of despair, but only a moment. She was her parents' daughter, and they had raised her to face adversity with courage. She would make the best of the situation, no matter how unfair it seemed. Sarah set to work immediately, throwing open windows to let in fresh air and attacking the dust with determination. By late afternoon, the kitchen and main room were beginning to look habitable. At precisely 6 o'clock, the ranch hands filed in for supper, 6 men of varying ages, all looking curiously at the new girl. Mr. Reynolds sat at the head of the table, while Jake took a seat at the far end, keeping his distance from the others. "Well, girl," Reynolds said as Sarah served a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, "at least you can cook better than you look." The men laughed, except for Jake, who kept his eyes on his plate. Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but said nothing. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her humiliated. That night, exhausted from the day's work, Sarah wrote in her journal by candlelight, "Today is the first day of my new life. I am alone and afraid, but I will not surrender to despair. Somewhere in this vast country, there must be a place for me, a future of my own choosing. Until I find it, I will endure." She glanced out her small window at the stars, the same stars her parents were under now, and whispered, "I promise, I will find my way." In the shadows of the barn, Jake Harmon looked toward the small light in the kitchen window, a strange, unfamiliar feeling stirring in his heart, one he had thought long dead. 2 months passed at the Lazy R Ranch. Sarah's days fell into a punishing routine. Up before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, cleaning, washing, mending, and cooking until well after sunset. Her hands grew calloused, and dark circles shadowed her eyes, but she worked without complaint. Mr. Reynolds proved to be a demanding and often cruel employer. Nothing Sarah did seemed to satisfy him, and his temper flared frequently, especially when he'd been drinking. One evening, as Sarah was cleaning up after supper, Reynolds cornered her in the kitchen. "You're a pretty little thing when you're not covered in dirt," he slurred, his breath heavy with whiskey. "Might be time you started earning your keep in other ways." Sarah backed away, heart pounding. "Mr. Reynolds, please. I should finish the dishes." He grabbed her wrist, pulling her roughly toward him. "Don't play coy with me, girl. I paid good money for you." "You paid for a housekeeper," Sarah said firmly, struggling to free herself. "Nothing more." Reynolds' face darkened with anger. "I'll decide what I paid for." Just as his grip tightened painfully, the kitchen door swung open. Jake Harmon stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the evening light. "Boss," he said quietly. "Horse trouble in the south pasture. Need you now." Reynolds hesitated, then released Sarah with a frustrated growl. "This ain't finished," he muttered as he stalked past Jake. Once Reynolds was gone, Jake lingered in the doorway. "You all right?" Sarah nodded, rubbing her wrist. "Thank you." Jake's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Lock your door tonight." After that evening, Sarah noticed subtle changes. Jake began taking his meals last, staying in the kitchen while she cleaned up. He rarely spoke, but his presence was a shield against Reynolds' unwanted attention. Sarah found herself watching Jake when he wasn't looking. Despite his silence, she sensed a depth to him that the other ranch hands lacked. She noticed how the horses calmed at his touch, how the other men respected him despite his reticence. One afternoon, while hanging laundry, Sarah saw Jake working with a skittish colt in the corral. His patience was remarkable, never forcing, always waiting for the animal to come to him. When the colt finally allowed Jake to stroke its neck, she saw a rare smile cross his face. "He likes you," Sarah said before she could stop herself. Jake looked up, seemingly unsurprised by her presence. "Animals know." "Know what? If you mean them harm." He patted the colt's flank. "Same as people." It was the longest exchange they'd had, and Sarah felt oddly warmed by it. Days later, Sarah was gathering eggs when she heard shouting from the barn. She hurried over to find Mr. Reynolds parading one of the younger ranch hands, a boy named Tommy who couldn't be more than 15. "Worthless fool," Reynolds was yelling. "That saddle cost more than you'll earn in a year." Tommy stood trembling. A damaged saddle at his feet. "I'm sorry, sir. It was an accident." Reynolds raised his hand to strike the boy. Without thinking, Sarah rushed forward. "Mr. Reynolds, I need help in the kitchen immediately." Reynolds turned, his anger redirecting. Toward her. "You dare interrupt me, girl?" "The stove is smoking badly," Sarah lied smoothly. "I fear it might catch fire." Reynolds hesitated, torn between his rage and the threat to his property. "Deal with that boy," he snapped at Jake, who had appeared in the doorway, then stomped off toward the house. Once Reynolds was out of earshot, Tommy gave Sarah a grateful look. "Thank you, miss." "The stove is fine," Sarah confessed to Jake. Something like admiration flickered in Jake's eyes. Quick thinking. That evening, Sarah found a small wooden carving of a bird on her windowsill. It was expertly made, each feather delicately rendered. She knew immediately it was from Jake, though she never mentioned it, and he never acknowledged giving it. She kept it hidden in her dresser drawer, taking it out sometimes at night. Running her fingers over its smooth surface dot, as summer turned to fall, Sarah began to notice changes in herself. The frightened girl who had arrived at the ranch was becoming a woman of quiet strength. She stood straighter, spoke more confidently, and had earned the respect of most of the ranch hands. One crisp September morning, Sarah was gathering kindling at the edge of the property when she heard hoofbeats approaching. A stranger rode up, a well-dressed man with a stern expression. "Morning, miss," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm looking for the owner of this ranch." "Mr. Reynolds should be in the main house," Sarah replied. "May I ask who's calling?" "Marshal James Blackwood," he dismounted. "And you are?" "Sarah Miller." "I'm the housekeeper." The marshal studied her with sharp eyes. "Miller? Any relation to Thomas and Eleanor Miller from over Helena Way?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "They were my parents. They passed earlier this year." The marshal's expression softened. "I knew your father, good man. I wasn't aware he'd passed." "My condolences." He hesitated. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you come to be working here?" Something in his tone gave Sarah courage. "My aunt arranged it. She accepted payment from Mr. Reynolds for my services." The marshal's face darkened. "Did she now?" "And how old are you, Miss Miller?" 17, sir." He nodded slowly. "I think you and I need to have a longer conversation. But first, I have business with Reynolds." As the marshal walked toward the house, Sarah felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. Something was about to change. She could feel it in the air, like the electricity before a storm. From the barn doorway, Jake watched the exchange, his face unreadable, but his eyes never leaving Sarah's slight figure as she stood, arms full of kindling, gazing after the marshal with the first glimmer of hope he'd seen in her since she arrived. The arrival of Marshal Blackwood set events in motion that would forever alter life at the Lazy R Ranch. After a tense, closed-door meeting with Reynolds, the marshal sought out Sarah. "Miss Miller," he said, finding her in the kitchen, "I'd like a word in private." They walked to the garden behind the house, away from curious ears. The marshal removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Your father was more than an acquaintance to me," he admitted. "He once saved my life during a bank robbery in Helena. I owe him a debt I can never repay." He looked directly at Sarah. "What your aunt did, essentially selling you into servitude, is not lawful, especially for a minor." Sarah's heart raced. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you have options. Reynolds has no legal claim on you." The marshal's eyes were kind but serious. "However, there's a complication. Reynolds is facing charges for cattle rustling. This ranch may be seized, leaving you without employment or shelter." Sarah's mind reeled. Freedom dangled before her, but with it came uncertainty. "I need to gather more evidence before I can arrest Reynolds," the marshal continued. "I'll be back in 2 weeks. By then, you should decide what you want to do. You could return to your aunt, though I wouldn't recommend it, or I could help you find a position in Helena with a respectable family. After the marshal left, Sarah wandered to the corral, lost in thought. She found Jake there, mending a bridle with practiced hands. "Reynolds is in trouble," she said quietly. Jake nodded without looking up. "Heard the marshal talking. Did you know about the rustling?" Jake's hands stilled. Suspected, didn't have proof. Sarah leaned against the fence. "The marshal says I'm free to leave. That my aunt had no right to place me here." She watched Jake's face carefully. "He offered to help me find work in Helena." Something flickered across Jake's features, a tightness around his eyes, a slight clenching of his jaw. "Helena's a good town. Safe. Is that what you think I should do?" Jake was silent for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "What do you want, Sarah?" It was the first time he'd used her name, and it sounded different in his voice, something precious and carefully handled. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've been told what to do for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to choose for myself." Jake stood, putting the bridle aside. "Come with me. Want to show you something." Curious, Sarah followed him to the stables. He led her to a stall where a beautiful Palomino mare stood. "This is Sunshine," Jake said, his voice softening as he stroked the horse's neck. "Found her half dead last winter, abandoned by traders. Everyone said to put her down." The horse nuzzled his hand affectionately. She just needed time and choice. Sarah understood what he was trying to tell her. She chose to live. Jake nodded. "Your choice matters, Sarah, not mine. Not the marshal's." For the next week, the atmosphere at the ranch was tense. Reynolds drank heavily and was more volatile than ever. Sarah kept her distance, counting the days until the marshal's return. One evening, as Sarah was reading by candlelight in her room, she heard a soft knock. Opening the door, she found Jake standing there, looking uncomfortable. "Reynolds is planning to leave tonight," he said in a low voice. "Taking the cash and best horses." Overheard him talking to his cousin from the next county. Sarah's breath caught. "Should we tell the marshal?" "No time. He's too far. Reynolds plans to cross into Wyoming territory by morning. What can we do?" Jake's eyes met hers, steady and resolute. "I can stop him. But you need to be ready to leave. It won't be safe hereafter." "Leave? Where would I go?" "I have a small cabin, up in the foothills. Built it myself years back." He hesitated. "You'd be safe there until the marshal returns." Sarah studied his face in the dim light. "Why are you helping me, Jake?" Something vulnerable crossed his features. "Some people deserve better than what life gives them." Sarah made her decision quickly. "I'll be ready in 10 minutes." Jake nodded and disappeared into the darkness. Sarah packed her few belongings with trembling hands. Through her window, she could see lantern light moving in the barn. Reynolds was preparing to flee. Suddenly, shouts erupted. Sarah peered out to see Jake confronting Reynolds by the corral. Reynolds had a rifle. "You're a fool, Harmon." Reynolds' voice carried through the night air. "Always were." "Can't let you take those horses, boss," Jake replied calmly. "You think I won't shoot you after all these years? You're nothing but a crippled cowboy I took in out of pity." Sarah grabbed her bundle and rushed outside, driven by a fear that transcended her own safety. As she approached, she saw Reynolds raising his rifle toward Jake. "Mr. Reynolds," she called out, distracting him. "The marshal is coming up the road." Reynolds whirled, giving Jake the moment he needed to lunge forward and wrestle the rifle away. A brief struggle ensued before Jake gained the upper hand, knocking Reynolds unconscious with the butt of the weapon. In the aftermath, Jake quickly tied Reynolds up and secured him in the barn. The other ranch hands, awakened by the commotion, gathered around. "Reynolds has been rustling cattle," Jake explained to them. "Marshall's been investigating. You men have a choice: stay until the law arrives, or take what you're owed and move on." Either way, Reynolds' days as owner are done. The men looked to each other, then back to Jake with newfound respect. "What about you, Harmon?" asked the oldest. A man named Caleb. Jake's eyes found Sarah in the crowd. "I'm taking Miss Miller to safety until the marshal returns. Then I'll be moving on myself." As the ranch hands dispersed to make their own decisions, Jake approached Sarah. "You ready?" Sarah nodded, clutching her small bundle of possessions. "Yes, thank you for standing up to him." Jake's gaze softened. "Should have done it sooner. For you." Under the vast Montana sky, filled with more stars than Sarah had ever seen, they rode away from the lazy R Ranch, Sarah on Sunshine, Jake on his faithful stallion toward the uncertain promise of tomorrow. Jake's cabin nestled in a small clearing among pine trees, with mountains rising majestically behind it. Though modest, just one room with a stone fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed, it was clean and sturdy. "It's lovely," Sarah said as Jake lit a lantern, casting a warm glow throughout the space. "Not much," Jake replied, seeming suddenly self-conscious. "Built it after the war. Needed somewhere quiet." "You fought in the war?" Sarah asked, setting her bundle down. Jake nodded, his expression distant. "Union cavalry. Got this leg at Gettysburg." He tapped his left thigh. "Bullets shattered the bone." Sarah understood then, his limp, his quietness, his need for solitude. "That's why you understand horses so well. You know what it's like to be broken and heal." Jake looked at her with surprise, as if she'd seen something in him that few others had. "You'll take the bed," he said, changing the subject. "I'll sleep by the fire." Their first night in the cabin passed in awkward politeness. By morning, they'd established a careful routine. Jake hunted and chopped wood. Sarah cooked and kept the cabin. They spoke little, but the silence between them was increasingly comfortable. On the third day, as they shared a breakfast of biscuits and venison, Jake surprised her with a question. "What would you do if you could choose anything?" Sarah considered this seriously. "I'd like to teach. My parents wanted me to attend a teaching college back east." She smiled sadly. They believed education was the path to a better life. "They were right," Jake said. "You're smart. Smarter than most." "What about you?" Sarah asked. "What would you choose?" Jake stared into his coffee cup. "This may be land of my own, horses." He glanced up at her briefly, then away. Peace. That afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled in. They watched from the cabin door as lightning split the sky and rain pounded the earth. The temperature dropped sharply, and Jake built up the fire. "Storm might last through the night," he said, handing Sarah a blanket. As evening fell, they sat before the fire, the storm raging outside. Jake, more talkative than Sarah had ever seen him, told stories of his years as a ranch hand, traveling from Montana to Texas and back again. "Never stayed anywhere long," he admitted. "Until the lazy R." "Why there?" Sarah asked. "Reynolds didn't ask questions, didn't care about my past. And I could work with the horses mostly on my own." Jake prodded the fire. "What about your parents? What were they like?" Sarah's heart warmed at the memory. "Kind, principled. My father was a carpenter, my mother a seamstress. They worked hard but always made time for me." She pulled out her worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. "My mother read to me every night. Said books could take you anywhere, even when you couldn't go yourself." Jake looked at the book with interest. Would you read some? Been a long time since I heard a story." Surprised but pleased, Sarah opened to the first page and began to read. Jake listened intently, his face relaxed in a way she'd never seen before. When her voice grew tired, he took the book gingerly, as if it might break, and tried reading himself. His voice was halting at first, then smoother as he gained confidence. "You read well," Sarah observed. "Had a teacher once, after the war. She Helped soldiers learn letters again. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Sight-I had a natural mind for it. As the night deepened and the storm continued, their conversation flowed more easily. Sarah learned that Jake had grown up on a small farm in Ohio, that he'd been only 19 when he joined the Union Army, that he'd lost his entire family to influenza while he was away fighting. "Is that why you're so quiet?" Sarah asked. "Because of what you've lost." Jake considered this. "Maybe. Words never seemed enough after that." "Sometimes they're all we have," Sarah said softly. Their eyes met across the firelight, and something shifted between them, a recognition, an understanding. They were two people who had lost much but refused to be defined by loss. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Jake announced he needed to check if the storm had damaged anything, and headed out. Sarah tidied the cabin, her mind replaying their conversation from the night before. When Jake returned midday, his expression was grave. "Riders coming." 6 men, not the marshal. Sarah's heart sank. "Reynolds' men?" Jake nodded, grabbing his rifle. "Stay inside. No matter what happens, stay inside." Before she could protest, he was gone, positioning himself behind a large boulder with a clear view of the approach to the cabin. Sarah watched anxiously through the window as the riders appeared. Reynolds was among them, his face thunderous with rage. Jake stepped out from his cover, rifle raised. "That's far enough," he called. Reynolds sneered. "There's 6 of us and 1 of you, Harmon. Don't be stupid. We just want the girl." "She's not property," Jake replied, his voice carrying clearly to the cabin. "She's a free woman, and she's under my protection." "Your protection?" Reynolds laughed cruelly. A crippled, mute cowboy with nothing to his name. "My name's enough," Jake said steadily. "And I've got plenty to say when it matters." Reynolds' face contorted with fury. "Take him," he ordered his men. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. 2 men rushed forward. Jake fired a warning shot into the ground before them, stopping their advance. Reynolds raised his own pistol, aiming at Jake. Without thinking, Sarah burst from the cabin, running toward them. "Stop!" she cried. "Please stop!" Everything froze for a moment, Reynolds with his gun half raised, Jake turning towards Sarah with alarm, the other men watching in confusion. Into this tableau rode 3 more horsemen from the opposite direction. At their head was Marshal Blackwood. "Drop your weapons," the marshal commanded. "Reynolds, you're under arrest for cattle rustling, kidnapping, and attempting to flee justice." Reynolds, seeing himself outnumbered, lowered his gun slowly. His men followed suit. As the marshal and his deputies took Reynolds and his men into custody, Jake hurried to Sarah's side. "Told you to stay inside," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I couldn't let you face them alone," she replied. Later, after the marshal had taken the prisoners away, promising to return the next day, Sarah and Jake stood outside the cabin in the golden light of sunset. "Marshal says I could claim a reward for helping catch Reynolds," Jake said. "Enough to buy a small ranch." Sarah's heart skipped. "That's wonderful, Jake. Your dream of land of your own." Jake looked at her intently. "Sarah, He took a deep breath. "I'm not good with words, never have been. But I want to say something, and I need you to listen." Sarah nodded, hardly breathing. "You deserve everything teaching college, books, a good life. And I'm just a broken-down cowboy with nothing much to offer." His eyes never left hers. "But if you wanted, if you could see yourself staying, this land could be ours. Not just mine." Sarah's eyes widened as she understood what he was saying. "I wouldn't ask for more than you're willing to give," Jake continued. "We could start as partners, friends, and maybe someday ... He trailed off, uncertainty clouding his features. Sarah stepped closer to him. "Jake Harmon, are you asking me to marry you?" A flush crept up his neck. "Doing a poor job of it, I reckon." Sarah smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Not so poor. In fact, I think it's the most beautiful proposal a woman could hear." Hope dawned on Jake's face. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Sarah whispered. "But not because I need protection or have nowhere else to go. It's yes because you really see me, and I see you." Jake tentatively reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "We could build something here. Something good." "We already have," Sarah said softly, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Sarah Miller realized that sometimes freedom comes in unexpected ways. She had lost her parents, endured cruelty, and faced uncertainty. But here, with this quiet man who spoke volumes in his silence, she had found something precious, a future of her own choosing. In the distance, a wild horse galloped across an open meadow, free and untamed against the vast Montana sky, a perfect emblem of the life that awaited them.